This is an outgoing message to my father, Juan G. Ortiz, or as he prefers to be called, Gil. This is his son, Alan. I just want to say that wherever you are, whether it is in the far reaches of the galaxy, or whenever you'll be forever with me in spirit, I just want to say that I love you forever and always. Send. What is up, everybody? Random Man here, bringing you my review for Astra. Now, the plot of this sci-fi adventure film basically follows an astronaut, played by Brad Pitt, who goes into space in search of his lost father, played by Tommy Lee Jones, whose experiment threatens the solar system. Going into this movie, I was very much looking forward to it, especially after the buzz it received upon its premiere at the Venice Film Festival late last month. Even from the look of this film, from the trailers, it looked like such an engaging and existential sci-fi film. Speaking of sci-fi films, specifically space ones, I feel we've gotten a great amount of them across this current decade, which includes 2013's Gravity from Alfonso Cuarón, 2014's Interstellar from Christopher Nolan, 2015's The Martian from Ridley Scott, and then last year we had First Man from Damien Chazelle, and I'll even throw in this year's documentary Apollo 11, one of my favorites of the year so far. In fact, all of these movies were my favorites among their respective years. So all of that really did bolster my interest in Ad Astra, and also with Brad Pitt at the helm, who's recently really shown himself for being an actor of great caliber, which goes right into talking about Pitt's lead performance as Roy McBride. I thought he gave one of his absolute best performances in Ad Astra. As I mentioned a little earlier, he showed himself to be quite prolific as an actor, especially recently, on top of being a producer. Not that I ever thought that he was ever a weak actor. No. He's one of my favorites working in Hollywood right now. But recently, he's been producing a lot of movies that do get a lot of awards recognition. In fact, one of his movies that he produced this decade did win the Best Picture Oscar, 12 Years a Slave, and he had a small role in this movie, but he specifically did win the Best Picture Oscar as he was one of the co-winners of the film for producing it. And now this year, on top of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, my favorite movie of the year so far, which I feel he deserves quite a bit of recognition for, he has a lot of the same attributes for Ad Astra. Pitt gives an intricately introspective performance here, both in how he is inner monologuing a lot through voiceover narration in this film, and in the expressions on his face that show off how he is as an actor. There's this one standout sequence where he is sending a voice message to his father, and just the look on his face, his eyes twitching in one moment, and you just see all the pent-up emotion that he's both trying to hold back and trying to express without getting too much into the actual mission, as he really wants to go after his dad and see what the hell is even going on in the first place. That is the testament of an actor at the top of his game. In terms of the supporting cast, there are quite a few notable names here, like, as I mentioned before, Tommy Lee Jones as Roy McBride's father, Clifford, but I wanted to take this segment to mention and highly laud Pitt's performance as Roy, as he is at the main forefront of this movie. As I said, he's in virtually almost every scene, and I will mention the supporting cast a little later on in this review. So just know that Pitt here, as I said, gives one of his absolute best performances. The writing of this film very much sets this film up, as it has been touted for the past few weeks in terms of its glowing reviews, as 2001: A Space Odyssey meets Apocalypse Now. And seeing those two films be mashed up in the style that it is here, it very much does show on screen and on the page. As with 2001: A Space Odyssey, this is a space movie with high amounts of existentialism, as this movie so famously and so importantly displayed over 50 years ago. And then with the Apocalypse Now comparison, that movie, which was based on Heart of Darkness, and 2001 itself based on the novel of the same name, Apocalypse Now was about Martin Sheen's character in search of Marlon Brando's crazy colonel character during the Vietnam War. And here it's done in the near future within Ad Astra's universe, in Pitt looking for his father, played by Jones, across deep space, specifically Neptune, where Jones's Clifford is. All of that makes this movie a space epic, and it's an odyssey very much like 2001 in the way it flows, but specifically for our main character Roy, as he goes through an extensive journey, both emotionally and physically, for what he is doing in space, as he is a decorated astronaut in his own right, just like his dad, before he went off to Neptune and did some experiments on his own that are affecting the Earth. That in turn threatens the entire solar system, as the movie opens with this sequence where Roy is on one of these giant antennas sticking up into the stratosphere, past it actually, and this huge power surge goes through, wiping out a bunch of astronauts working up there, and Roy is tumbling down to the Earth. It's an exhilarating way to open this film, but don't let this movie fool you into thinking that it's going to be something that has a lot of big moments in between just because it takes place in space. No. One thing that the writing from Ethan Gross and this movie's director James Gray makes clear is that this movie is one that is meticulously meditative. This movie is so intent on taking us through space with Roy, and also going on the similar emotional journey that he is, as one of the big themes of this movie is the relationship between father and son, or parent and child, and also just the very idea of existence. As I said, this movie is very high on the existentialism themes here. As we are venturing through space too, we are treated to some awe-inspiring visuals as given to us by director James Gray. I've only seen one other film of his prior to Ad Astra, and that was The Immigrant, starring Marion Cotillard, Joaquin Phoenix, and Jeremy Renner. I really enjoyed that film, and I would really like to see The Lost City of Zed, given how much I was into Ad Astra, as that's another adventure film, but that taking place in a different time period and setting. But in the way Gray directed Ad Astra, as I said, the movie is precisely focused on taking us through this extensive and emotional journey that Brad Pitt's Roy goes through. And what he does too is linger on certain shots that really do emphasize how specific moments do affect Roy. And also just the way we see the near future as depicted in bits and pieces, as I was so into the way this future was told. And that goes right into some of the technical merits of this film. The way this movie is shot is absolutely gorgeous. The cinematographer is Hoyt van Hoytema, who previously did Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, another space movie, as I mentioned earlier. And the way the camera moves all around, in it either staying stagnant or showing us the various wonders of space to the stars, which is this movie's title's literal meaning in Latin, Ad Astra, to the stars. And how the production design also supplemented what we are going through. Like, for example, the moon here is not just used as a launching off point for astronauts to go deeper into space, but it's also a place where various humans do live, and we do see big name brands and corporations take over here on that location. And the same kind of shady illegal dealings that are done here on Earth do carry over to the moon, and I think that would realistically apply, as one of the more standout sequences of the movie does have to do with this rover buggy chase that was fully and officially released online here on YouTube. And yeah, that was a marvelous sequence for sure. But again, as I mentioned with the opening of this movie, don't let this movie trick you into thinking that it's going to have a lot of flash bang boom sequences, as this movie is meticulously meditative, as I said before as well, and it's something that does take its sweet time to tell the entire emotional arc that Fitzroy does have. But either way, in the way this movie looks, just how it mixes both practical effects and visual effects together to a seamless blend, just added on to the overall aesthetic that this movie has. Same goes for Max Richter's score and even the sound design of this movie. This being a space movie, the original score I thought supplemented the emotional moments that we go through with Roy, as I've so emphasized greatly across this review. But then how the movie, as it's emphasized greatly by the director with some interviews, in its realistic portrayal of space, as realistically as a movie like this could portray, it shows that when explosions do happen or the rumbles of various ships and rockets taking off do show, they do have this big boisterous effect on them. And I have to mention as well that I did see this movie in IMAX. Yes, 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 see this thing in IMAX if you can. The added benefit of larger speakers and a bigger screen do make the difference with how space movies are viewed. And I've seen a lot of the aforementioned space movies from this decade that are some of my favorites of their various years in IMAX, so it does make a difference. I mentioned this too because in the way this movie is edited and paced together, running at a little over 2 hours, I had little issue in the way it flowed, as a lot of people are knocking this movie for being quote-unquote slow or boring or utterly pretentious, anything like that. Well, I don't disagree with how slow this movie is, in that that was the overall intention from frame one. But I do have to draw the line at boring, because with visuals this stunning, a score this ambiently atmospheric, and the lead performance from Brad Pitt really tying this whole thing together, I cannot in any way see how this thing would be boring. And as I mentioned too, seeing it in IMAX did make the difference, with the booming sound and the large screen having me sucked into the narrative. In the end, I really didn't have that much issue with this film in how it came together, aside from the way some of the supporting characters were implemented in the narrative. As I mentioned earlier, there are notable names in the supporting cast here, like Tommy Lee Jones as Roy's father Clifford, who gets more prominence as the movie does progress, especially by the end. But then we have other people like Donald Sutherland as an old friend of Clifford, who does initially go with Roy on the journey, but then is not seen for the rest of the movie. Without giving anything away, he's just not there after a specific point. Liv Tyler also plays the wife of Roy, and she's basically wasted in her entirety here. She only speaks about a dozen or so lines, if anything less than that, if I do remember correctly. And given how she's only in it for a couple scenes and she's supposed to link Roy back to his connection on Earth emotionally, aside from his father, that wasn't emphasized enough. John Ortiz also shows up briefly in one scene earlier on in the film, and then the most notable player of the supporting cast, I feel, aside from Tommy Lee Jones, is Ruth Negga as this character on Mars once Roy does reach Mars, as again, I'm not giving anything away here, he is venturing all the way to Neptune to try to retrieve his father. Negga's character does add some specific insight as to how she is as a character in relation to the solar system as a whole, and even the journey that Roy goes on. And I wish that her character, like some of the other players here, were expanded upon even more, but I got her purpose here, and her, along with Tommy Lee Jones, I thought gave some very solid performances for the screen time that they have. But again, this is Pitt's show through and through. And aside from how these characters are treated, it really is offset by the way Pitt pulsates this narrative to become such an opulent odyssey in space in its own right, separate from any other space movie that I've seen from any time period. Lots of moments were very cathartic for me. In fact, I did see this movie with my own dad, and he really enjoyed it as I did. And this was something that I felt a lot of people would be able to really connect with, no matter how they view the ending of this movie. And again, without giving anything away, it's not necessarily one of those ambiguous kind of endings. It's a very direct conclusion, but it's told in a specific sense where it does have something to be further interpreted upon, and also just how the movie ends here, it does make it distinct from all other movies. I also felt that if it ended in a way that had to be drawn upon further interpretation from the viewer, it would come off as another 2001 copy, as so many space movies since that movie's release have tried to emulate or outright rip off. But either way, I did love where the movie ended up, and overall, I loved this movie as a whole. This is one of those films that I do agree with many in the sentiment of how it is as one of the more gripping films on a thematic and emotional level. But I do see where people have problems in how it's not going to be for everyone in its pace. James Gray himself is a controversial filmmaker, and I'm actually a little bit surprised that he took on a project like this with as big of a budget that it had, only increased by the reshoots that it went through. And I do have to give props in some regard to this movie being a movie from a major studio, no matter who had it first, and it having this big of a concept that also goes in the way of existentialism on top of the scope that it has. I think that this is something that we don't see very often. But all in all, if I wasn't clear enough already, I love Ad Astra. This is one of my favorite movies of the year thus far. I highly recommend it. My final verdict for Ad Astra is 4.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Ad Astra, social media links in the description, subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.